when I was getting ready for bed, I would feel this like kind of like itchy, burning, prickling on my scalp. A couple days later, I noticed like more hair continued to fall out and then just like piles would come in the sink. And that's when I like really melted down. I messaged my dermatologist who said that that was more consistent with alopecia areata. So I guess I was really lucky in that I had a pretty easy time getting pregnant, and I was really worried about it because I had ulcerative colitis when I was starting off in college, and then so timing wise, I guess I was diagnosed in 2011 with that, and then in 2018 I had a surgery that was a total colectomy, so I had my colon removed, and it's a 3-step surgery. So like I had an ostomy bag for a few months. So that was a journey. Like it was, but the biggest risk for that surgery as a woman is that there can be scar tissue that forms around your fallopian tubes and can make it hard for you to get pregnant naturally. So I was anxious about that, was grateful and excited and like nervous when I found out I was pregnant. And I had like a very easy first and second trimester. And I'm like privileged enough to have really good doctors. And because of my colitis history, I was already kind of regularly checking in with like not only my regular OB, but also the high risk OB at the hospital I was delivering at. So I had like really good access. And so like 29 weeks, I was saying to myself, this is so easy. I could do this 10 more times. And week 30 hit, and like that's when everything changed. So I had what started off as kind of like full body hives, which I had after my surgeries. And I find that like really just like, I guess, discouraging, uncomfortable. And so I was kind of sorting that out, and I would notice like that at night when I was getting ready for bed, I would feel this like kind of like itchy, burning, prickling on my scalp. And that was not something I had experienced before. And so I was like doing all kinds of topical stuff, like getting ready to maybe explore going on steroids for the hives. Would use some like scalp itching stuff. And then a couple days later, like I noticed more hair was shedding when I would wash my hair. And so I messaged some girlfriends, and they had said that their hair shedding had happened mostly like postpartum. Messaged my doctors, and they said that, you know, it is common post pregnancy, but it can happen like in the 3rd trimester. And I was like, I'm from Dallas, like big hair has always like been part of my identity. And I had a lot of hair. And so I had like thankfully, like the bar was high. Like I had enough hair to lose to where like I was like, okay, I can lose some hair and you won't really be able to tell a difference. A couple days later, I noticed like more hair continued to fall out, and like more hair would fall out at a time. And it was such that like I would have it up in a ponytail, and I would feel like a tangled matted area, like I guess like next to my pony, like I guess on top of where the ponytail holder was. And I would take it out, and I would realize that so much hair had like fallen out, but because it was held by a ponytail, it like wouldn't fall to the ground. So then it would like be like kind of detangling, and then just like piles would come in the sink. And so then I found like a little like quarter sized patch of scalp on the top of my head, and that's when I like really melted down. I messaged my dermatologist who said that that was more consistent with alopecia areata. And it was kind of hard to, I think what I learned about alopecia like pretty quickly was that there are different types. There are some types that are from like hair pulling. There are some types that are like androgenic, so like female pattern hair loss. And alopecia areata is the autoimmune version. And what I learned really quickly that I like kind of hadn't known, which I wish I had, was that if you have one autoimmune disease, it makes it more likely that you can have another. And so ulcerative colitis is autoimmune. And so to diagnose alopecia areata, they do scalp biopsies, which they did, but it's like pretty consistent with like, it starts with kind of like a nickel sized patch. And from what I understand, like it's a wide range of like, sometimes all your hair falls out, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it progresses to like full body hair loss. And so I did some like triage type appointments where they can like inject your scalp with, and I have like photos of kind of how quickly it was happening. But at that point, it was kind of like when I had my hair at a side part, it was just like there were like big patches of scalp exposed, which was like, at that point, I was like, maybe we should just shave my head because it's starting to feel like that would feel more attractive than what's going on right now. So I did these injections that are like kind of steroid injections in your scalp that can be helpful to promote hair growth. And so it was like kind of navigating this doctor, checking with this doctor to make sure it was safe for the pregnancy. And by like 6 days from when I first started noticing the hair shedding, it was like, it kind of got to the point where I was like, and every time I touched it, just like more would come out. So my husband and I shaved my head, and it just like, I mean, I just like wouldn't wish it on my like worst enemy. I don't have any enemies, but like I really wouldn't wish it on anyone. And I've talked to women who have lost their hair from alopecia over the course of like many months. And I think that would maybe be worse because I think it would be a constant like, how much more hair am I going to lose? This was obviously like really traumatic, but there was a rip off the Band-Aid aspect to it. So I guess what happened next was that we got into, my OBs were concerned enough to like check in. They wanted to see the baby. And I was lucky enough to be getting like regular scans, more regular scans than folks and friends of mine who have not been considered like a high risk. So we went in to get him scanned, and his growth had pretty much plateaued. So he wasn't growing as much. And that had happened, like timeline had really aligned with when the hair fell out. So I went on steroids, and that really helped. The goal of the steroids was like, had some different parts to it. One was to help him grow and kind of calm down whatever inflammatory response was going on in my body that was impacting him. And then two, the goal is that like it can maybe keep more hair, or it can like maybe help with hair not falling out. Cause at that point I was really concerned about my eyebrows and eyelashes. And so the hope was that like that would hold on to those. So thankfully the steroids helped with his growth. Like he was like bounced back, like growth wise was good. But we decided I was always going to have a C-section because of my colon history. But we decided to have that at 37 weeks because at that point it was full term, but it would get my body out of whatever like pregnancy stress response was going on. And then it would make it so that I could go on whatever medication I wanted to for the alopecia to grow hair back. Because it wouldn't be safe to be on it with the baby. So at that point I was like, it was interesting how quickly my baseline of like what was worst case scenario changed. Like I think I took for granted that like the baby would be healthy. Like I was far enough in my pregnancy to where like I felt confident about him and his health and safety. And thank God he's wonderful and had a healthy, safe delivery. But I think at that point, my baseline in terms of like my personal situation was rapidly changing. Because at first I would text girlfriends, and my sister knew someone who had lost a lot of hair with her pregnancy. And I remember asking my sister, okay, but like, did she go bald? Like for me, being bald was like worst case scenario. And then like a couple days later, it was like losing my eyebrows and eyelashes is worst case scenario. Like that kind of just kept changing. And I have like, I know I'm biased, but like I have the best friends in the world, and I have like the best husband in the world. Like he has always made me feel beautiful. And I think my parents raised me with like a high level of self-confidence. And it was also like, my identity as a woman had always been and still is really tied to the way that I look. And I always identified as like being like relatively pretty and like feeling pretty good about the way I looked. And all of a sudden I was like, you know, third trimester pregnant, like not feeling like it's the body that I'm used to at this point anyway. And then just like really, I mean, just really shocked. And like, I have been in therapy for years and love my therapist. And like, I worked with her obviously a lot, and still am, but it was just like, there was so much shock and so much like, let's like get to the finish line. Like, I kind of felt like, okay, all of this, like I can address once the baby's here. Like, let's just like, my husband just kept saying like, let's land the plane. So it was like really shocking, but I was also very much like, I'm sure the hair will grow back. So like, is what it is. So yeah, I would say like shocking, scary. It was scary to think that like, it was scary to think about whatever was happening to my body, like was affecting the baby, and that, just how totally random this felt. Like so random. And I think like when you ask what did doctors say that stood out to me, like I think sometimes seeing them a little bamboozled was both validating because it made me feel like, okay, this is as messed up as I feel like it is. But then at times it was also like frustrating because it's like, okay, well, if this is so out of left field, then like why is it happening to me? And so there was a big kind of like intimacy aspect to it. There was a total shock, but I really did get to the point where like I had taken a shower and FaceTimed one of my girlfriends, and I had like taken the towel off my head and shown her what was remaining. And I texted my husband like, okay, like we're shaving the head when you come home. And he, when he saw how much hair had been lost that day, like he was also shocked. And he was from the very get-go, he was like, well, shave your head, you'll look so great, like whatever. So there was some shock. And then we like FaceTimed my parents and my sister, and everyone was like, you look so great. Like, I'm so proud of you, like you look so great. Like, we're gonna figure it out. So really like some relief, because I think there was such fear, like when it first started falling out, like what will happen if I'm bald? And once I shaved my head, I was like, okay, I will be able to live like this. And there's like been a big journey of self-love in the meantime, and moving forward. But like there was a little bit of relief too, and like, oh, okay, like my head has a nice shape, like all these things I never thought I would care about. From what I have learned, like pregnancy-induced alopecia is, I've Googled it. There's like one woman who like told about her situation having it. Since that post from Emily Oster, there were a few women that like commented or messaged me saying they too had experienced it. But my doctors, I guess, had never seen it happen so quickly. Their concern was like making sure that there wasn't an underlying autoimmune thing going on. So like I did a bunch of blood tests, and thankfully like nothing else was going on. And I always knew I wanted kids, but was not one of those people who felt so attached to my babe. I didn't feel like I knew him yet. I didn't feel, and I was already like, we had like a very great life before he was born, and like nothing compares to what we have now. But I knew having a baby, I would grieve the previous chapter. I knew that I would love my baby, but I knew I really needed to like meet him first. There were so many times where, like in the weeks leading up to it, I was like, and for as a disclosure, like I love my baby so much, and I like wouldn't change a thing now. But then I really was like, why did I get pregnant? Like, why did I feel so certain that this was something we wanted? Like, I miss my hair, I miss our life, like that kind of thing. But so yeah, the C-section, I had like had to advocate for, and I have a good relationship with the surgeon who did my colon surgery. And so I had to like kind of advocate for his office to, or I'd been in touch with them about any considerations that were needed for a C-section with my J pouch. I guess what I had to advocate for was more the OB who was doing my C-section to make sure that like she knew everything about a J pouch and that kind of thing. Because I was told when I had my J pouch surgery that it's not a super common thing, and so a lot of medical professionals don't know as much about it. Which is fine, but I've never been like the best advocate for myself. So that was the only like consideration, but I had a great OB who did the C-section, and she had consulted with my surgeon, and that felt fine. So the C-section went great. I mean, it was like, incredibly surreal, and he was born and he was healthy, and it just felt so miraculous. And I was really relieved that he was here and that like we could kind of start the next chapter. And I was like also like very depressed. But yeah, I was just so sad. And at that point, like I had learned that the the alopecia was something that like it was started looking more likely that it would be a permanent thing. And I just like, I, I sometimes, given my history, like I sometimes get just overwhelmed when there's like some sort of medical situation to figure out. And I started feeling just overwhelmed knowing that there was going to be kind of a process of figuring out like, do I go on medication? Like, what does all of that look like? And then kind of like just figuring out how this happened. And I just was kind of dreading that. I had a lovely maternity leave. Like I started feeling more, I think after like 2 or 3 months, that's when I would say my mental health like started improving. And and so basically a 2 month, like basically after the baby was born, I noticed that like my eyelashes and eyebrows were thinning, and it was just like, so that just really, it was one of those things where I was like, I still feel like I look like myself. And then once those started going, I was just like, that's to me what was really scary. I believed my husband when he said I would be beautiful without hair. I did not believe him when he said I would be beautiful without eyebrows. Like I just, for some reason there was something, I was like, that's my face. Like I just um so so basically so then I was kind of in this limbo where like they were basically half fallen out. So doing mascara or anything like that didn't really work. And I was doing research about kind of like doing makeup with alopecia. So it's definitely been a learning process. But I would say like once I was able to kind of get more used to doing fake eyelashes, doing the fake eyebrows, like that started building my confidence up more, because then I felt like, okay, I can look more like myself. It has taken a long time, and now I feel so much more confident than I did, and seeing kind of like some of the benefits of alopecia, and like seeing it not as something that's like exclusively bad. I really like having a blank canvas to work with, and I think there's something really powerful in like, I don't think a lot of people get the opportunity to, for lack of a better phrase, like kind of be stripped down to like the kind of without, like, if we think about our eyebrows and eyelashes and hair as like these like accessories or pieces of a mask, like I get the opportunity to be um really loved and really held by the people who love me when I'm in that, in any form. And so to be able to feel loved by my husband and by my friends and now by my baby is like something that feels so sacred to me. And it's been interesting too, like I my hair has always been such a big piece of my feminine identity, and it's like as I lost that, I gained this like other element of my feminine identity that's like being a mom. And my baby, like I know he thinks I'm beautiful. Like I know he doesn't care that I'm bald. And so like experiencing that connection with him as I'm kind of like rediscovering who I am and kind of learning, taking on this new identity was like really special. Um, I also have like started exploring the wig world, and it's pretty fun. I have a wig that I love. And that's fun. So I don't feel like I'm no longer someone who can ever have hair. Like that doesn't feel like something I can't access. Um, I, but it is, I mean, I have major waves. Like sometimes I see an old picture of myself. I would say resoundingly what I come back to often is just like, I really cannot believe this happened. Like I cannot believe I am bald. Like I cannot believe my hair fell out. And, so it's, I mean, it's really just, I don't think like I know myself well enough, and I know just enough to know that like this is something that I will like always feel the loss of if the hair loss is permanent, which like I think it is. So I think I'll always feel the loss of it. I I'm not going to go on the medications that can grow back your hair. They're called JAK inhibitors, and apparently they're very effective. But I was on pretty heavy drugs for my colitis for years. So I would do like, you see all the ads for them all the time, Entyvio, Remicade, Humira. They're like injections or infusions, and they're immunocompromising. And JAK inhibitors are immunocompromising. And part of the reason I got my surgery was so that I wouldn't be on those. And I would maybe consider going on them if I had a condition that was really impacting my quality of life and I couldn't move around very easily. But for this, to me, it's not worth it. So I'm like in a process of making peace with like this might be my permanent forever, and like working on making peace with that being okay. As for the like future pregnancy thing, it's a little more unclear. I'm, still in the process of learning more about the relationship between different autoimmune diseases. So I'm kind of in a fact finding phase, not trying to have another kid anytime soon, but really would like to. And so yeah, we'll see. Those are kind of my unknowns right now. It's so unfair that I lost my hair, but I am like so lucky in like so many ways. And like this whole experience has helped me helped solidify that feeling so much more. And then I think just things take time, and I think it's great to be surrounded by other women who have had experiences or had babies or had pregnancies, and that always helps.